All right, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is John Vasquez. I'm going to be doing this community college to PhD pipeline presentation for you. And I'm going to have to be honest. I was a little nervous because I was trying to talk. I was thinking about why not, do I talk? Do I give you a presentation? So I want it to be interactive. And so I'm going to do the default that they teach you in grad school, which is I'm going to put together the PowerPoint, but I'm going to give it to you. So if you just joined us, if you want to go to that tiny URL, you can just download the entire presentation with all the links and everything that'll be in it. And you'll have access to all the information. And if you're interested in knowing more about some of the data that I share, I'll be happy to share that with you as well. I'm going to try and play a little bit of double duty here in terms of both look at the chat, but then also talk. So also feel free to, if you've used Zoom before, raise your hand, type in a message in the chat. I'll try to get to it. And I will make space for questions and answers and try to get some interaction through use of some polls as we go along. First and foremost, I really want to encourage you all to look at the conference from last year, especially the one that Katarina, the session that she did with actual community college transfer students. And so she's smiling because she didn't think I knew this. I prepare for these presentations. She had some amazing students come on and really talk about what the experience is like transferring from a community college to a four-year institution. And so you should go watch that on YouTube. It's great. And they have a lot of really great information. And so what I wanted to do was kind of give you a little bit of a different aspect to this journey, more from like the institutional side, but also from someone who has been through it. So I'm John Vasquez. I just received my PhD. I've worked, however, in higher ed for the past 20 years at University of Michigan and Michigan State. I am a first-generation student. It is for, first-generation college student. Let me go back for a second real quick. I forgot to put that, thank you, if you got it. Dropping that in this chat. First-generation college student. I grew up from a low socioeconomic status. I may not look it. I'm over 40. And my family grew up on the original food stamps. They gave us the original cards that you had to go someplace to a house or a store, and they gave you the cheese and the flour and everything. And let me just tell you, that government cheese used to be really good in quesadillas. It made the best quesadillas and nachos. So when they stopped giving those out, like my family was really sad. Like many of you, or those of you who have a similar background, I was raised with my grandmother, my abuelita. I did have my mom. My mom worked full time. She got pregnant in high school and she had me. And so she had to work to support us. So my grandma raised me. So I spoke Spanish until I went to basically kindergarten. The first day of class, the teacher's like, what's your name? And my first response was C. And you could imagine how that just kept going because that wasn't even English, but that's the only that's the only thing I could understand. And so I learned English in K-12. More importantly though, back then, I was from a generation that was told not to speak Spanish anywhere but inside the house. So outside in school, if we were in public, always speak English because my family was really afraid we'd be discriminated against. I'm from Texas and from San Antonio, from the West Side, so the barrio. So that's kind of how I grew up. I didn't have any guidance about college, going to college, what a PhD was, what master's degrees. What I did have though was family pressure from my family. Most of my family either worked in, like basic food service industries. Some of my family was still farmers or worked on farms. And so everybody from my mom to, my tias and everybody were like, go to school, be better than me. And, as an adult with my own kid and, having a PhD, that whole notion of be better than us, that stays with me and that becomes a part of your identity about what does that actually mean and the impact that it has on you. And so I wanted to share that little bit about my background with you because those are part of the things that some people will call barriers, other people will call um, you know, what makes you tough, what gives you grit. It's part of who you are. And what I'm hoping is that um, whether you're thinking about going to grad school or not, that that is something that you want to acknowledge and to utilize for your own purpose to motivate you. Um, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about that. And so I'm really interested in knowing who's here. And so what I'd like for you to do, if you can, is if you have your phone, you can use your phone, click on this QR code, or you can type in this URL, or click the link. And so I'm going to put it in here. And hopefully if you click it, you will go to a poll, and I'm going to switch over to that. Let me share. And the poll should look like this. And so what I'm wondering, if you can get to the poll, is if you're a student, if you're a faculty member, if you're staff, once you click on that, yep, you got it. You will start seeing, we'll start seeing this. And so about 97, there's about 30 people voting. Most of you are students. That's awesome. I have another question for you. The next question is, like, where are you located? I know we saw some of you were typing in your institutions. I'm interested, okay, Northeast, Southeast, Pacific Coast. Stay safe, people. I know there's some issues going on out there besides COVID, like the fires and everything, and being serious. Like, I hope you all are safe and your families are doing well. Got some East Coasters. Nobody from the Rocky Mountain region yet, so. Very cool. Here's another question. I know sometimes people are really hesitant to share. I'm interested in how old some of y'all are. Cool. Yes, I'm not the only one over 35. Awesome. Yeah, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask this is because in traditional four-year institutions, a lot of times people think, oh, most of the students that go to, you know, most of the students are, we call, quote, traditional age, you know, 18 to 24. And what a lot of, especially four-year institutions, don't understand is that there are a lot of community college students who are not the traditional age. They're in their mid-20s, early 30s, some are over 35, and they're, you know, they're starting their journey at the community college with the intent of going to you know, a four-year institution and then maybe going on to grad school. And so I love to see this, because what it means is, yeah, like there's a lot of folks that, the presentation I'm going to give you, the information I'm going to share with you, is meant to address some of the issues that those of you who are maybe a little bit older, who have kids, who have been working and are transitioning, to be able to offer you some advice to help you along their journey. So I love seeing that. And so that being said, I'm interested in kind of, when are you thinking of transferring in the future? And so fall 2021, in about a year, sometime in the next 2 years. Okay, this is great. This is very helpful. Okay, so probably in a year to 2 years, which you know, sounds like a good time frame. I think we'll be able to, or I'll be able to provide you with information that would be helpful in that sense. Let's head back. I'm going to head back and share with you some, you know, start kind of going into the presentation. So one thing I want to acknowledge that, so this presentation information I'm giving it to you, a lot of it is going to be based on pre-COVID, right? So there's information that I'm going to be providing with you, some guidance. I just really want to acknowledge that a lot of it is based on things that were happening before the coronavirus hit. However, I and a lot of my colleagues who work at institutions, for institutions, community colleges, and grad programs, we realized that this has impacted students in a number of different ways. So there's a lot of different things that are going to be happening in the future that I just can't talk about now because we just don't know yet, of how some of the admissions and transfer processes are going to be changing. Some of that's going to, we've already seen some of that, like there's some institutions that are no longer, especially PhD programs, that aren't going to look at GRE scores or GMAT scores for MBA programs and things like that. And so we know that students who are doing undergraduate research may not be able to do in-lab biological research because labs are shut down. And so that is something that will be thought about in the future by a lot of different institutions of how they address that. So I'll mention it, but I won't be able to give you any specifics of exactly how. So I'm just gonna give you the answers to all your questions now. I'm just gonna give you all that now. So if you get tired of me hearing me talk, you have the presentation, I'm giving you the main points, you can log off now. But there's three main things I want you to get out of this presentation before you leave. You gotta plan. You gotta develop a network of support, and you have to learn to ask the right questions. Now, if you leave now, you'll have the presentation, you'll be able to do that, but you may not understand the context. So I'm hoping you'll stay, so you'll hear about what the context means about this. Because it may not be as simple or straightforward as you'd think. And so, so my background is in higher education. So I got a PhD in higher adult and lifelong education. I actually studied the different pathways that people take in science, technology, engineering, math, STEM, to go through, higher ed into careers. So I like to say I study science as a vocation. And so one of the things that I learned first early on, both as a scholar, but also just as a student who was going through this process, is that there are a lot of barriers in the pipeline. If you can think of it as like pipes in your house, there's clogs. There's lots of hair clogs. And they come in different forms. They come in forms of lack of information. So if you were like me and you grew up in a background like me, like I didn't have a lot of information about going to college. I didn't have any role models. I didn't know people who did this stuff, right? My dad, I'll be honest, I don't know if my father got a high school degree because he died when I was 10, and he died because of violence in our neighborhood. And so I don't know what he knew about school. My family didn't know about that because like I said before, they worked in food service. So there was lack of guidance. There was lack of community in higher education. I'm just gonna be really honest with you. There's not a lot of underrepresented students, URMs. There's not a lot of Latinos, Chicanos, Native students, Pacific Islander students, African-American students. There's not a lot in higher education when you look at the total numbers. Now, there are pockets of us, but a lot of the schools that students traditionally go to tend to be what we call predominantly white institutions, which is what it sounds like. There's a lot of white students there, a lot of white faculty. And so when students go to those programs, they talk a lot about a lack of community there. And the elephant in the room is like, it also costs a lot of money now to go to school. I'm not gonna lie to you. I got my PhD. It took me about 20 something years to finally get through everything. I'm leaving school, when I think about the interest and everything, with about 6 figures worth of debt. We're talking close to $200,000 worth of debt. A lot of people wouldn't want to admit that. I'm not saying you should do that. This is why I'm doing this presentation though, because I see some of your faces and I'm like, I don't want you to do what I did. So I'm giving you the information that I wish I had. There's a lot of unconscious bias in the system, like in higher ed. There's a lot of it. And by unconscious, I really like to focus on that when I talk to students about this. We have some allies in higher ed for us. We have some really good allies, student allies, white allies, faculty allies. But that doesn't negate the amount of unconscious bias that's there. And so it impacts us, and it impacts us in ways that sometimes we don't realize. And so again, I'll make a plug for going to look at the video from the students last year. They talk about this. They talk about the impact that this had on their experience. Again, institutional barriers. Some of those institutional barriers you've probably already met if you've tried to talk to somebody about transferring. It's like, where are the transfer agreements? What are the plans? Like, how do I transfer? Where's the information? Sometimes a barrier, institutional barrier, is simply like, how do I put in the application if I'm not applying from high school, I'm applying from another institution. Sometimes there's different processes for that, and institutions don't always make that clear. So Um, and and I know a lot of faculty and staff, especially those of us who want to help students, hate to hear this, but it's true. Higher ed sometimes is designed intentionally and not to be challenging, right? Yeah, the scholarship processes are really confusing, right? Some of you may have applied to institutions where they said you were automatically, you know, our financial aid process, we automatically look at scholarships for you, but they didn't tell you which ones or what you qualify for or why you didn't get any of that. So like, how are you supposed to know that? Or that there's other scholarships you may qualify for, but they're not, you have to go someplace else to apply it, not through financial aid. So it can be really hard. Um, and so, and this is the other part, like there's plenty of barriers to getting done. But when you think about the system, there's no barriers about dropping out, right? It seems to be very easy in some cases to like just leave this institution without any degrees or anything. And so that's something I think hopefully we'll be able to address. There's a question in the chat about, I didn't know what is the best thing to do to pay for my higher education. Maybe we can address some of that as we move forward. And so again, that's why I tell you 3 takeaways: plan, 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 a network of support, and knowing what to ask the right questions. And so the first thing, what I mean by, make a plan, is I want you to understand, for those of you, when we think about what is a good job, we define a good job as one that pays at least $35,000 for workers 25 to 44 and $45,000 for workers 45 to 64. And so, there's some stats here. For workers with less than a BA, 56,000 is the median pay. If you got a bachelor's degree or higher, your median earnings are about 65. Like, that sounds really good, right? That sounds great. My mom is still a cafeteria worker. My mom, I do her taxes. She makes less than 35,000 a year. And she's remarried. Her and her husband together make less than $60,000 a year. And as a full-time PhD person, I make about twice what they make now. And I think about that. I think about a lot of what I had to get there to do that, the sacrifices they made, and what it would mean, what I can do for them to help them now. And so I have to tell you though, I didn't always think about that. I did not make the conscious decision to pursue a master's degree first and then a graduate degree. This little chart here talks about, if you have high school or less, over the long term, your pay remains pretty static. Middle skills is talking about like, if you go to a vocational program, get a little bit more, and then if a bachelor's degree, this whole notion of time, like in a couple of years, the more advanced degrees you get, it's not just about what you're making in terms of a basic salary, it's how much does that salary go up over time. And what we know from the research is folks with advanced degrees, their pay winds up going up over time. I told you I have a kid, he's 19. I'm struggling, so I have a background, I have a degree. I'm struggling to get my kid to understand this aspect, because his whole idea is like, I'm just gonna go get a job, and so I can buy the stuff that I want now. And I'm trying to and yes, I showed him this graph and it did nothing for him because he's 19. So he didn't buy it for me. So we're working on it. Here's the really important piece. Employment rate by educational attainment. This is still holding true even within COVID, is what we see is individuals who have a bachelor's degree, master's degree, doctoral degrees, they're still employed even in times like now, times of economic downturn. And so and part of that has to do with the nature of the jobs that those degrees allow you to get. So I get to work from home on a computer. My mom, for the biggest time, because she's a cafeteria worker, she didn't know if she was going to go back to work because we didn't know if schools were going to be open. And so those are some of the things that knowing, understanding, and planning about, thinking about what do I want to do, how far advanced do I want to get, that's an important question to ask yourself. And so again, so takeaways: plan, a network support, and ask the right questions. And so The second takeaway that I want to talk about is this whole notion of building a network of support. And
Oh, that one.
so,
That one's tinier. Feel like a baby?
um, and so one of, several of the students at the video last year talked a lot about building a network and networking. And what does that actually mean? Networking, most people think of networking just as, networking when you're looking to get a job, right? I need to talk to folks who can get my application in front of someone. Building a network is also really important when you're thinking about your plan around going through higher education, especially if you want to go into a PhD program. You need to look for a number of different things. So if you download the presentation, you'll see these definitions, but I'll go through them real quickly. So when you build a network, especially in undergrad and in grad school, you really got to think about like, who are the people who have access to money and power and influence? And so we think of those as sponsors. You can think of them as the faculty who have research projects who can hire you to do research. You can think of it as the financial aid folks who have the money and who know about scholarships that you can contact and ask for help. Access for opportunities in undergrad, though a lot of those are folks like advisors. They're people like at SACNAS, people like Katerina who know of opportunities. They may not be able to give you money, but they know about opportunities. They have information that they connect you to so that you can, get what you need in order to move up in your next academic level. Professional development is that stuff around getting you the skills, knowledge, and competencies you need in order to stay current and advance in whatever kind of industry or discipline you're moving into. In grad school in particular, but also in undergrad, this intellectual community. Who are the folks who are around you who are supporting you, supporting your education, supporting you, encouraging you, and helping you study and learn how to be better writers, which takes us to the substantive feedback piece. Most of the time when we think of feedback, we think of it in terms of like academic, like writing and whatnot. Substantive feedback also means getting information or getting help from people who can really give us insight into how we can improve or how we can get the things that we need that will help us in the future that we may not understand. So I'll give you some examples here in a minute, but role models, safe space, and accountability for matters. I mean, accountability for really matters is that there will be many points where you'll have to make a decision. Hopefully, what I hope after this workshop is that you wind up applying to grad school. And so the decisions you're gonna have to make is where do you go? And so having people that you can talk to about, I have this really hard decision to make. Should I go to University of Michigan or should I go to Grand Valley, which is a regional college? Which one of those do I go to? I'm torn, there's pluses and minuses. How do I make this decision? Asking someone who can honestly talk to me about that, who knows who I am, my background, my family status, who can give me that honest advice. In my case, I talked to my kid before I went back to school. He was 15 at the time, and I said, and we had many conversations about like, what would happen if I went back to school? His first reaction was, we're gonna be poor again. When I talked to him, I was like, number one, you don't know what poor means. And number two, I'm like, what does it matter? You still have an iPad and like game, Nintendo, whatever, Switch or whatever it is, you're fine. Like you're not gonna have to worry. So the third takeaway is not just asking questions, it's knowing how to ask the right questions. And so when you download this, you'll see there's a link that talks about 10 tips for knowing how to ask good questions. And part of that talks about like planning out the questions you want to ask and knowing your purpose. And I'm going to go over what some of that means. And so the way I'm going to do this is I thought about this. It was like, so I could talk about my experience. You can go see some other folks, but really what I wanted to do was highlight, Maria is a real person. His name has changed, but Maria is a real student that I know. She was a first generation college student. She was interested in science and biology when I first met her. She was at a community college. Biology was just a question mark because she didn't know if she wanted to do pre-med or she wanted to do biomedical science. She had taken 4 semesters, so about 2 years, chemistry, biology, the advanced chemistry courses, and some humanities courses. So she had done this stuff. And so she was really interested in transferring as a junior to an institution, right? Because she has 65 credits. And in most institutions, you need like 120 to graduate. So she's like, I think I'm a junior. I think I'd like to do that. And so we're like, okay. But that's when she hit the first barrier, transferring schools. And sometimes we talk about this and sometimes we don't. And so this is where I'm going to go back to if you have the poll, I'm going to go back to it. So one of the first questions she had is, where do I go? Do I go to a regional school like a Grand Valley University, or should I go to University of Michigan? Because she wasn't sure which one she wanted to do. And so before I tell you what she did, I'm interested in knowing, it's going back to our poll and seeing what do you think is, when transferring from a community college, what is the average transfer student loses how many credits when they transfer? And no, and I'll tell you right now, yes, it's going to vary by institution, but we're just going like for a national average. Oh, and let me share so you can see this. Getting close, yeah. So I think majority of y'all said 25%. And y'all were pretty close. The actual answer is 43%. So overall average, students traditionally lose about 43% of the credits when they're trying to transfer. But it also depends on what kind of institution you're coming from and you're going to. And so, if you're at a 2-year private for-profit institution and you're transferring to a 2-year public, some of those students leave, they lose a lot of credits, 97%. And there's a number of reasons why. I'm not going to go into the whole thing about like all the different reasons and all the different areas, but I think it's an important thing to point out to you. And so it's something that has always been a challenge for a lot of students. In Maria's case, she lost credits. And so depending on whether she went to Grand Valley or University of Michigan, and so remember, I want to point out, at this point, she didn't know exactly what she wanted to do. If she wanted to do pre-med or go do a biology degree or biomedical science as a PhD, she didn't know. So depending on where she transferred and what program she decided, she could only transfer either half or, about half of her credits. And part of the reason why is because prerequisite classes don't count. Remedial classes don't count, and she had those. In addition, at the University of Michigan in particular, like everybody had to take the intro bio class, even if you already took it. And part
Oh my goodness,
it's a weed out class for pre-med students. But if you're a biomedical student, someone who's gonna do a biomedical PhD, you don't care exactly if you don't get an A in that class, right?
Yeah.
You just want to take it because it's the basics. So, in addition, depending on which institution she went to, she was gonna have to take an additional 60 credits because that was part of the requirement for being there. And so that's one of the challenges too, right? How many more classes do you have to take? And in addition, when she realized it, when she actually came down to it, only 3 of the courses she already took. Again, the 30 or the 42 would count, but only the 3 of the courses she took would actually count towards her actual bachelor's degree major. All the other courses were going to count as electives, which is kind of like defeating the point, right, of starting at a community college. And so, and of course, this would change depending on what institution she went to. So in some cases, depending on which institution she wound up, she would either have to pay for 2 more years of tuition, maybe 3 more years. And I don't know about you, but like undergrad costs a lot now, right? It costs a lot back then, it costs a lot now. And so, and I'm gonna keep going back to them. Like the group from last year, they talked about these barriers. Oops. They talked about that even when you transfer, needing to have more money for tuition, opportunities to do research, the lack of advisors or mentors not knowing how to connect with them was really important for them. And so in Maria's case, again, those barriers were big. And so again, I'm pushing for, if you start thinking about what kind of network of support you need right now, you can start taking some things into account. And specifically going from a community college to a four-year institution, the kinds of advisors, the kinds of folks you need to connect with are people who really understand sponsorship, access to opportunities, and that substantive feedback part. She needed to make sure she not only talked to someone who knew about like the transfer agreements, but who could also understand the academic side. So talking to someone who could talk about the courses and the level, what kinds of stats, because you need stats in undergrad now. We did, back in my day, you didn't. You got to take stats in your master's degree program. In undergrad, you take stats, you take genetics now. And so asking which of those courses are required at the new institution, are there prereqs for that? Planning that ahead of time is really key. And so that's why I say, here's asking the right questions, and asking the right questions to advisors, mentors at both institutions or at the multiple institutions you're going to go to. So when I say, like, instead of just asking, will my credits transfer? One of the questions you should be asking is, will my credits transfer specifically for my major? What else will I need to take? What does the financial aid process look like for transfer students? One thing I didn't say at the beginning is, so at the University of Michigan, one of the programs that I started was called the Jack Kent Cook Community College Transfer Student Program. And so what we did in that program is we brought students who were at a community college, we gave them the opportunity to do summer research at the University of Michigan over the summer. And while they were there, we looked at their financial aid, we looked at their academic courses, we went through their courses. And we tried to help develop a plan so that they understood when they applied, for one, that we helped them apply. And then when they came to University of Michigan as an undergrad, they would know if they were coming in as a sophomore, as a junior, how much time they needed, how much more financial aid they would need, and connected them to those resources. That was really key. Because what we also know is, depending on when you transfer, at some institutions, you transfer in the winter term, you miss stuff about housing, you miss stuff about financial aid. And so asking the questions around how does that work is really important. What are the resources available to transfer students? A big question that a lot of students that I had, and that Maria was able to get engaged with, was study abroad. Like, study abroad is a big thing that happens in undergrad that opens up a lot of doors for students. And if you're a transfer student, sometimes you think, oh, I don't have time, or because I'm trying to finish in 2 years. Some institutions, and this is the part where I could go on a long tirade about, charging students tuition for doing study abroad. I'm like, we should, like, I'm a big fan of, you don't charge students to do study abroad. We pay students to do study abroad. These are opportunities, these are experiences for students to be engaged in. And so making sure there's opportunities to do that is important. Also, things, even at the undergrad level, even before transferring, I always tell students, if you think you might do a higher degree, whether it's a master's degree or a PhD, ask them before you transfer, well, what resources are available to me to help me get into grad school? Because this isn't my only stop. There's another stop after this. And so I want to know what resources you're going to have. Because the comments that I would get from a lot of transfer students, especially community college transfer students, is they'd say something like, well, I missed the first 2 years at the four-year institution. So I missed all the stuff that they talk about the first 2 years about how to prepare for grad school. And so when you're transferring in, that whether junior, sophomore, or junior, you're kind of just trying to figure out where everything is, right? You're trying to figure out what the classes are. You're trying to figure out where the resources are. So you're not thinking about planning for grad school, whereas the other students who started as a freshman are. So this is where Maria did this, and this is where I'm going to make a big plug for the McNair Scholars Program. Chances are, if you transfer to a foreign institution, whether it's what we call regional, so like in Eastern Michigan or Eastern Oregon or something, the SUNY system, the California systems, they're familiar with McNair's programs. So you should understand that and be aware of that. McNair programs are for undergrads. They're for undergrads who come from a low SES or who are from underrepresented groups. And their whole purpose is to do exactly what I just said, which is help you figure out how to get into grad school, but also help you find funding, provide you support, provide you community, provide you advice. And surprise, surprise, they're doing a virtual grad fair for underrepresented students October 9th. And it's virtual, so that's in the link, that's in the PowerPoint. You should register for that, attend to that. But in addition to that, again, SACNAS, amazing organizations. If you've just heard about this now, SACNAS is great. They have lots of different webinars about this. And so they're having a webinar around non-research mentors and mentoring. A lot of times, again, when we think about mentors and advisors, we only think about like faculty or research faculty as mentors. There's a lot of great non-research mentors who can also help you through this process. And so they're doing a webinar on that September 24th. And so I would encourage you to go to that. And again, so any questions so far, you can throw them in the chat if you want about this. I want to pause here and just give you a moment to ask questions. Get me a drink. There was a question earlier about getting a master's before a PhD. And I'm going to say the answer that a lot of people hate, which is it depends. It depends what you're going to do. For some students who didn't have as great an undergrad as they want to have to get into a program that they're trying to get to, and I'm not trying to be vague, like literally if you were a B student and you got your bachelor's degree and you're aiming for a big Big Ten institution to do a biomedical PhD, like University of Michigan, and you're kind of a B average student, but you were really engaged and whatnot. Sometimes going to a master's degree and doing a biomedical master's is a good idea, because what it allows you to do, allows you to show them that you know how to take graduate courses and that you can do well in graduate courses. So in that case, it would help. In some other areas, like in engineering, a master's degree in engineering will open up a lot of other doors for you. And so what I want you to do now is is go to the poll, because actually this is some of the questions I want to ask you about that. Because here's what I'm wondering of what you all know about grad school. Where do STEM PhDs go after getting their degree? So in this case, specifically PhDs. I know I just talked about masters, but where do they go after getting a PhD? Okay. A good chunk of you are saying they stay in academia, industry, okay. Okay, most of you think they stay in industry, okay. What kinds of jobs do you think STEM PhDs do after graduating? So. Postdocs, yeah. Very true, right? Especially in biomedical sciences, it's postdocs, yeah. Industry research, okay, yeah. Here's the big question, okay. So most of you think they go into postdocs, doing postdoctoral research. Yes, that's absolutely true. Here's the last question. On average, how much do you think PhDs make a year? And I should say, this is my last poll for you all. I know people get tired of over 100 grand. 50, somewhere between 50 and 100 grand. So remember, most of y'all said academia, or a lot of people said academia. So I'll share with you the answers. So where do PhDs work? National Science Foundation, which is kind of, there's this thing that every PhD has to submit after they graduate. They fill out a survey. So after they ask for where are you going. 43% say academia, 36% said industry. So y'all are pretty close with that. What do they do? STEM PhDs, you can think of doing even after, so a PhD, typically you're doing research, you have to do research to get it. What's interesting is after they get the PhD, there's kind of two tracks. People stay either doing research intensive work or they go into non-research intensive work. And on the research side, they're doing tenure track research, doing industry research, kind of academic work. In other cases, they're doing, when it's non-research intensive, maybe they're teaching. So there are a number of folks who will get a PhD in, say, engineering, and they won't go work at an industry. They'll go work at a small liberal arts college or at a community college to teach engineering courses, which is always great. But they do lots of other things, intellectual property, regulatory affairs, things like that. How much do they get paid? With a doctoral degree, in 2018, on average, they were getting paid about the median, so the middle, $1,750, slightly less than professional degrees. Professional degrees and doctoral degrees, so professional degrees are like JDs, MDs, they fluctuate a lot. And so this can be a little bit deceiving. So again, from the National Center of Science and Engineering, in the life sciences, physical sciences, math, and engineering, and as you can see, engineering, math, computer science. So math, computer science is math and computer science. So if you do a lot with like data analytics and you go work at a place like Google, you'll make a lot. What this doesn't tell you though, is it doesn't compare this to cost of living. So you may get paid $120,000 in industry, but then you're living in Silicon Valley, which can be really expensive to live. So keep that in mind. You get paid less in academia. Lots of different reasons. But yes, so you're all pretty close. And so, we just talked about like barriers to getting into undergrad. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the barriers to grad school. So going from undergrad to grad school. But then not only that, like kind of while you're in grad school, some of the challenges there. And rather than just, I don't want to bemoan those things. So I'm not going to focus on that. There's a nice science article that you could read, Science Magazine, that really talks about like 5 things that you need to think about. They talk about choosing your mentor carefully, planning your future career early, paying attention to mental health and mapping out goals and finding work-life balance. Like these are all things that they say you need to do. And so, again, when I think about this, I'm going to come back to like, this is why I'm talking about developing a network of support. Like you need to do all these things, you need to find all these people. So as you are transferring to your four-year institution, well, as you're in that process, I want you to ask some of these questions. And when you go to when you're applying to grad school, also think about asking these questions. Things like, is the training provided appropriate for my goals after grad school? And I would encourage you to ask the following question, which is, I think I might want to become a tenure track faculty member. Or I think I might want to go into industry. So what do you have in place that will help support me in those goals? A lot of times, doctoral education is about helping you become a mini version of your advisor. So if they're an academic doing research, like if they're a tenure track faculty member, they're training you to become mini thems. And so, and yes, writing lots of grants is a big part of tenure track positions, especially at large institutions. So asking them, what if I don't want to do that? What professional development is available to me? What if I want to do something else? Will I have the support to look at something else? What opportunities do you have to do summer research and study abroad? As a grad student, I got funding to do research, to take summers off. So I spent time with my family and I conducted research. And I also did an internship. So I was a 40-year-old intern in Washington, D.C. with high schoolers, like recent high school students. Not to be mean or anything, but I was just like, so yes, I was the old guy that they would ask to like, hey, do you want to go? We're gonna go to a bar. Do you want to go with us? Well, we used to be able to go to bars. You're like, do you want to go hang out with us? I'm like, no. I also, but here's the thing, and so this is the point where I asked earlier how old people are. So here's the thing that I had to also deal with. So not only, so I did a summer internship in DC, which was an amazing experience, but I still had to pay for housing in both places because I had a house, I had a mortgage, and I had to pay for living at the living in DC, which can be really expensive. I had to pay for utilities in both places. Had to make arrangements for my kid to have someone to live with them because he wasn't going to come with me to DC because he was going to be in school for part of that time. And so it can be a challenge, but I asked for help. I got extra funding from my department to support me because they support summer internships. So they gave me extra funding to pay for things. I got funding from the grad school to do that. And I had to ask. I had to ask for that additional support. In addition, when you're thinking about grad school, you also have to ask questions like, a lot of times they'll say the grad program is fully funded, but what does that actually mean? It's fully funded. What they mean it's fully funded is they're going to pay you, let's say, a small stipend to live there, but then you're going to have to teach and do research and or do something else. And so asking those questions about what is the funding associated with is really important. And then a big question that I always ask people, and I asked at my institution, I went to Michigan State. I did not go to University of Michigan for my grad school. For my PhD, I went to Michigan State, its competitor. And I went there because they had more Latino students there. Even though I was going to be much older than many of them, I wanted to be around more Latino students. They had a lot more other programs. I'm not undocumented. I have family members who are. But they had a program that helped support undocumented students as well that I wanted to be a part of. And so I went there. So asking how not only do you support diversity, but make it inclusive. I'm gonna stop here and I'm just gonna make a big plug for my institution because to be perfectly honest, before I came to work here, I didn't know independent research institutions exist and I didn't know you could get a PhD there. So I'm like, when I started working here, I just saw how amazing our program was. We train biomedical readers. So when you come to our program, you get a PhD in biomedical research. It's a small program. We only have a total of 30 students. And then this year we were supposed to have 12 coming in our first year, but we only got 6 because of a bunch of different COVID and just some of them were international students. But, you know, their stipend every year is $36,000. So that's how much they get paid to live here. And Grand Rapids is not that expensive. It's less expensive than Ann Arbor or East Lansing, where the other two institutions that I came from were. They get health, dental, and vision, travel, relocation money. I did not get relocation money when I went to MSU. And so, and professional development. And so it's really important to ask these questions to help you make an informed decision about where you go to grad school. Maria's case, the reason I know her is because she came to Van Ando Institution to do her degree here. She got through the pipeline. She graduated as PhD. She, however, did not become faculty member. She is going to start her own company and has already filed her articles of incorporation. And so she is starting her own business. And we did not teach her how to start her own business per se, but she learned a lot about like the administrative processes through our institute because we're so small. She was able to like learn a bunch of other stuff about that. So it was really helpful in her case for what she wanted to do next. And so again, thinking about the community college to PhD pipeline, a lot of it has to do with planning. What do you want? Planning and thinking about what do you want to do and putting that plan together, building a network of support and knowing how to ask the right questions. And so that's the whole thing right there. I wanted to leave plenty of time to be able to ask questions, for you to ask me questions. I want to go through the chat and to do some of that. While I'm going to end the presentation, but I'm staying on. And so I want to make sure that if you have any questions, throw them in the chat or feel free to ask me directly. Mm. Is it the same? So I want to go back a little bit. Is it the same if you earn an associate's degree in terms of um, like long-term financial outcomes for yourself? Like getting an associate's degree is you long-term, you wind up making a little bit more money than if you left with no degree. We know that for a fact. Not as much as if you had a bachelor's degree, but there is still long-term. Is it, let's see. There are some universities that have joint BS master's degree programs, or just time to get your master's. And yes, ask advisors from the website. There are a number of really interesting programs that are targeted to getting more folks like us into science. And they're, in some ways, a lot of them are called bridge programs, bridge to doctorate programs. And it's an actual funding mechanism from NSF that's trying to encourage more underrepresented students who start at the four institutions to get a master's degree, and it's fully paid for. In many cases, masters aren't paid for. You have to pay those out of pocket because they're 2 years. And so, but some of these programs are really targeted because they want to get more. We had one at University of Michigan, which is a really good one. What advice do you have for full-time workers and full-time students? Find a program. The first thing you need to do is you need to find programs and you need to look at their academic catalog and see when courses are offered. So my PhD was targeted to full-time workers. So they had the first year, the first 2 years, our courses were from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night on Tuesdays. So we knew for the first 2 years, we were gonna take, that's when we would take classes. And so we could work around our schedules. I wound up quitting my job and going to school full time. And so what that did for me was, you know, yes, I had to stay at class late at night when I could have been home, but it wound up just opening up opportunities for me to take other classes in other places. Do you have any personal goals you tried to accomplishing while trying to obtain your PhD? Actually, yes, it was conducting independent summer research and doing an internship. And the reason I wanted to do those two things is because internships open doors. I have gotten, and so I'm gonna say, for those of you who may know me or know people at MSU, I'm not, what I'm gonna say next may sound like I'm dissing MSU or even U of M, and I'm not. So my advisors were good advisors, but they weren't necessarily good mentors, and they didn't necessarily help me network, right? So networking at the graduate level, networking there looks more like connecting me to other people who do my research. And networking means helping me find opportunities to do other things. My advisor didn't really do that because he did a different kind of research that I did. He was quantitatively heavy. He did a lot with statistics. I did not. I was a qualitative researcher. But my internship was the Council of Grad Schools in Washington, D.C. The mentor that I had there, Hiro is his name, Hiro, Dr. Okahana, he opened up so many doors. He provided me so much advice. He helped me understand not becoming a faculty member was going to look very different and some of the challenges he experienced. So he was, so I just said, so I didn't say this before. So I'm openly gay. I have a partner, have a kid, live in Grand Rapids. You know, he grew up, from an Asian background, went to Berkeley, California, went from there, you know, has a different experience. But we talked a lot about our goals, our dreams for our kids, kind of our dreams for our own kind of career paths. And he shared so much. And not only by doing that, I learned from him about like just the different barriers, different challenges that might arise for me. But he also then connected me to other people that he knew. So when I started writing my dissertation, I had to learn how to read statistics, which I didn't know. He connected me to literally the people who do the statistics stuff at the National Center for Education Statistics. He introduced me to the people who put out the reports. And so that was just, from a researcher standpoint, that was really amazing. And so, I'm trying to think, what other questions do you have? There's a question from Ida about the grant application process. Which grant application process? There's a number of them. I'll say this.
I'm sorry, I just don't like. I've never heard of grant applications, so I was
Okay.
like, what? Like, I don't even like know.
Yeah.
You know.
Good question though. So there's grants at a number of different levels, right? So there's grants and undergrad. If you hear about grants, you hear about it in your financial aid package, right? That's money that you don't have to pay, like you don't have to do anything for. They just give it to you. When I talk about grants and applying for grants, at the grad school level, I applied for a number of different opportunities where they would give me a grant or money so I could conduct my research. And so one summer I got $5,000. And in any kind of research program that you do, typically there's stuff you have to pay for. There's stuff you have to pay for like supplies. I did people research. So I had to pay my participants money to engage talking to me for hours, like an hour here, an hour there. So the grant money allowed me to pay somebody $75 for just talking with me. And what's interesting is that there's lots of people who do research on like us, on Latinos. And like they'll say, oh, I'll give you, I can give you a $10 gift card, or can you please fill this survey out because, I can't give you any money. I was able to pay my participants a lot of money. I got money so that I didn't have to work over the summer. And so one of the grants that I got was called the King Chavez Parks Future Faculty Fellowship. It's a KCP program. It's here in the state of Michigan. It gave me a full year of funding, plus health insurance for me and the kid, plus health insurance, everything. I did not have to teach. I did not have to work. I got the funding so that I could just stay at home and work on my dissertation. That allowed me to work from home, to be there while he was finishing up high school. And what it also did is freed up my time so that I could start looking for jobs to apply to a year before I started, a year before I was going to graduate. And so I had a heads up on a lot of other students who were trying to dissertate, do research, and look for jobs and do everything else.
Oh, wow. It seems like a lot, but it's thank
it's
you.
Amazing, yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I know you mentioned that when you were doing your PhD and you were working, but then you decided not to work. Like what really influenced you to quit your job and like commit to your schoolwork?
I have to look and see if my friend is online here. So this is me, not anybody else. I got to the point where I was working that I got so frustrated with the institution that I was at. I got frustrated because and this is how I interpret it. I was doing work for a bunch of white faculty, for a bunch of old white men who were not the most supportive, who were not the most inclusive, and they were getting the credit for everything I was doing. And then when they were saying issues, when they were telling me things like, well, we're trying to figure out how to help students of color, they're saying they're not being supported. Why is that? And I'm like, maybe the way you're talking to me right now, like things that you're doing to me, like giving myself as an example, I just fed up. And I have to say this, but I'm going to say the caveat this. So up until that point, I had already been working for 20 years. So when I quit out of anger, but I also had retirement money. So I pulled money out of retirement, which you should never do because you pay a lot of taxes on it, a lot of taxes. The IRS came back to me because I didn't pay enough taxes on it. So I pulled out money to do that. Luckily, the minute that I quit, I quit, I took 3 months, took my kid on vacation, took my mom on vacation. She wound up quitting her. It was really funny. She had her midlife crisis late. I had mine early. She quit her job. I quit my job. We all went on a 3-month vacation and spend some time together, which I would totally agree if you're going to do that. If you're going to join a PhD program, is do that. Spend some time together. And
Sounds
then
nice.
I immediately went and talked to the department and said, I quit my job. I need funding. And again, I networked. I talked to people who worked in grad schools. And luckily, the grad school dean I actually knew. And she was like, she was a big competitor to the dean that I worked with at the other school. And she was like, come here, we'll give you a job as a grad student. And in their case, they got a full-time employee with like 20 years of experience, but they paid them a grad student rate. So not the smartest thing, but it worked. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There's another question here. I just want to check in with Katerina. I know there's a break and then there's a 3:30 event happening. So right now is the 3:15 is supposed to be our break, right? I'm going to stay online if you want to keep asking me questions, but there is a 3:30 going back to the networking thing. You should make sure you do. And so there's a good question around what can those who struggle with writing professional emails to transfer advisors at schools that they want to attend do? The big question that the first thing I'll say is do your homework. And so when you're drafting that question, be specific. So you don't want to say what courses count, like what is going to, because they're going to tell you the same thing. They're like, here's our transfer pathway here's our articulation agreement. They'll say, here's our transfer agreement. Here's this or that. What you want to say is, I've got 16 credits in chemistry. I looked at your I looked at your catalog. I see 2 of those courses will transfer. These other 2 courses don't, or don't seem to. They're not showing up anywhere. Will they transfer? And not only say that, then do the extra mile and say, I'm attaching the syllabi for those courses. If I were to transfer, could I get credit for this? And what that indicates, 2 things will happen. One is they'll either respond and be like, that's a good question. Thanks for doing your homework. Or 2, they'll say like, go talk to somebody, like go talk to the faculty member, or they'll do somebody else. But really, I have found that when you are very specific with a question, they're more likely to respond. But that's also part of the hard part, because that involves you having to go do and figure out like where the answer is, or like where to find the information. But I also tell students, not hearing nothing back from somebody there, 1, shouldn't dissuade you. Like find somebody else to email and email them. But 2, and I'm being very serious, if they don't respond, that says something about the institution. And so that you should be thinking of, even if it's someplace you really want to go, it's your school you want to go, you should be thinking about that. Like, I'm a student, I've emailed them 2 or 3 times, they've never responded, and I'm not a student yet. How do they treat their regular students? Is this telling me something about what the experience is going to be like? And so ask yourself that. Yeah. And I love that there's a program advisor for STEM at a community college level, and saying that response is 100% on. So, yeah. And then, yes, and rewrite your questions, yeah. Any others? Oh, what can those, oh yeah, the same one. Okay. Yep, have auto response, but they haven't set up something to an email, yeah. Canned response, yeah. Any other questions? You should be able to download the entire presentation, like I said before. If you have any questions, be happy to email me. I'll show you. You can email me at work, or you can email me at any one of my personal email accounts. Any of the schools that I go to. Yeah. So like, Katerina, thank you everyone for hanging out with me for this afternoon. I appreciate it.